Okay, numbers starting to stabilize. I think it's time for us to get started. So, hi, hello everyone, and welcome to the Sophos MDR ThreatCast, August 2025 edition. My name is Greg Iddon, Security Services Architect for Sophos MDR. Joined with me today is a number of fantastic speakers. We've got Dan Inglis from Threat Intelligence, Colin Cowie from Threat Intelligence, and also Pavla Kulam from Threat Hunting. Agenda-wise, we'll be covering a number of interesting things. So the typical, we're going to do threat landscape with Dan, who's going to take us through what's been going on in the wider world. Colin's going to take us through the observed threat activity we've been observing within Sophos MDR itself. Pavla's going to take us through just a couple of really interesting threat hunts that he's and his team have been doing this month. And then I'll take us through a review of what the X-Ops and the wider X-Ops community team has sort of been working on in terms of research and so on. That's going to be interesting to you. And then we'll do Q&A at the end. As always, though, just remember, if you have a question, about anything, be it related to the content, be it related to cybersecurity, be it related to Sophos, feel free to use the Q&A panel on I think it'll be your right-hand side in the top right. There's chat, which I don't believe we really use. I don't think that's public. Click Q&A, then you can put your questions into there. What we'll do is I'll interject and pose that question to the presenter and say, can you handle this live? Or we'll either answer behind the scenes in the Q&A section, or we'll hold onto your question and bring it up right at the end. This question always comes up as well. Yes, we are recording right now. The video recording and references will be uploaded to the MDR community channel within the next 24 hours or so, and then this will make its way to YouTube at some point. I'm not in charge of that one, so this will be on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube, hi, thanks for watching this in the future. Right, that's enough of my insane voice. Let's pass on to someone who's got some really interesting things to say. So Dan, you can come join us on stage and take us through the threat landscape.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. All right. So let's get started with some recent threat activity. So we're going to start off with some SonicWall SSL VPN activity. So in late July, researchers started observing a wave of intrusions targeting these appliances. So at first, it was unclear whether or not a new zero-day was involved here. But as more information came out, SonicWall then clarified the attacks were actually linked to an older 2024 vulnerability. So that was CV 2024 4766. So this was often combined with the use of migrated local credentials from older Gen 6 systems. One of the more serious issues here is that MFA was not being enforced in a lot of environments, but actually in other cases where MFA was enabled, it was brute forced, so which made it possible for attackers to gain access even though they had these additional layers of security in place. So the ransomware group Akira has been seen using this vector, and once they're inside, they moved quickly, and in several incidents, they were actually able to reach domain controllers within just a few hours of compromise. So SonicWall has since released Sonic OS version 7.3, which includes enhanced protections against these brute force attacks, as well as the MFA attacks. So that version is now the recommended patch for all Gen 7 systems. So if you haven't already, make sure to patch. Obviously enforce MFA everywhere you can, and then also reset any local passwords that were migrated from Gen 6 to Gen 7, because these were the accounts that were compromised previously and then were being used in these new attacks. This is especially important to act now because we're actually seeing initial access brokers allegedly selling this access on the dark web. So they're selling access to these compromised appliances. That's kind of what's shown here in a couple of these screenshots. But we also suspect that the prime customers of these are likely ransomware affiliates. So it's possible you may see even more ransomware groups use these devices in the future for initial access. All right, so up next is a zero-day vulnerability in WinRAR that we've seen actively exploit in the wild. So CV 2025-8088 is a path traversal vulnerability which allows attackers to create RAR files that place malicious files outside of the intended extraction directory. So these RAR files, were typically delivered through phishing emails, and in the reported cases, attackers dropped executables into either temporary or local app directories, while also placing Windows shortcut files in the user startup folder. What this would mean is that the malware would then automatically execute the next time the system starts without any indication to the user. What makes this particularly interesting are the payloads that we've seen delivered here. So in one campaign, multiple backdoors tied to the RomCom threat actor group were observed. So this includes a SnipBot variant, a newer tool called Rusty Claw, and a custom Mythic agent. So each one of these offers remote access and post-exploitation capability, with both SnipBot and Mythic in particular showing up in high-value targets. One aspect I want to highlight about these backdoors is that our team actually previously collaborated with Unit 42 regarding the initial discovery and analysis of SnipBot. And so the version that being seen in these new campaigns appears to be an updated variant with several changes, including enhanced obfuscation as well as persistence techniques. I also wanted to point out the screenshot here. So this is kind of showing what WinRAR is using in terms of this path traversal. So this actually is what's placing these files outside of the execution, the extraction directory. And it's really kind of emphasizes how trivial this exploit is. So the fix for this vulnerability was issued by WinRAR in version 7.713. But because WinRAR doesn't auto-update, many systems may still be vulnerable. And as a precaution, we recommend pushing this out where possible. But you also may want to consider temporarily blocking RAR attachments in email. There we go. Okay, moving on from vulnerabilities. Let's talk about some recent law enforcement action against the ransomware group BlackSuit. So on July 24th, Operation Checkmate led to the seizure of several BlackSuit infrastructure components. So this included both their leak site and negotiation portals that the group used to manage victim extortion. Then on August 11th, the Department of Justice confirmed the seizure of 4 servers, 9 domains, and almost $1 million in cryptocurrency that was linked to previous ransom payments. So what does this mean for the group next? Before talking about that, I think it's important first to give some context. So about a year ago in August 2024, the Royal Ransomware Group rebranded into what we now know as BlackSuit. But in fact, the Royal Ransomware Group itself formed as a spinoff from the Conti Group in 2022. So the point here is that this kind of rebranding is quite common among ransomware groups, and that either want to avoid either getting too much attention from law enforcement in the first place, or even as a fresh start after disruption such as this. And in fact, we're already seeing evidence of exactly this. So there's a new ransomware as a service group emerging known as Chaos, and this group is currently thought to be BlackSuit's successor. All right, and finally, to close out the landscape section, I want to take a look at a unique intelligence opportunity involving Kimsuky, a North Korean APT group. So last month, we discussed the North Korean IT worker campaign in greater detail. So if you missed that, definitely go back and give that a watch. But to sum things up really quickly, this campaign involves North Korean IT workers applying for jobs at Western companies, usually as either freelance or contract developers. And once they're hired, they blend in, they're writing code and attending meetings just like a normal developer would. But behind the scenes, they're funneling earnings back to DPRK programs and also planning backdoors used for later access. So early this month, a data set entitled APT Down, the North Korea files was leaked online. This collection includes about 9 gigabytes of internal files, which were reportedly tied to an individual working for the group. So the data contains phishing kits, logs showing attacks on South Korean government domains, Cobalt Strike loaders, and even a full archive of the South Korean Ministry of Foreign Affairs email platform. So on the slide here, you'll see 2 screenshots. The first shows a file directory containing these fake identity documents, which included government issued IDs and accounts purchased on Upwork and LinkedIn. These were what was used to apply for remote developer jobs at these companies. And then the second screenshot is from the threat actor's AnyDesk dashboard. So this shows active remote sessions to multiple systems, kind of offering a glimpse of how these threat actors manage access across several different compromised environments. So together, this leaked data set kind of gives us a rare insight to how Kimsuky actually operates. And it also emphasizes the importance of identity verification. So not only for your own company, but for also any third parties or companies that you do business with, it's important to verify how they're doing their own identity verification. And with that, I'm going to pass things off to Colin to take us through our observed threat activity.
Thanks, Dan, for that very interesting threat landscape. Now let's discuss some of the trends and observations that Sophos Managed Detection Response and Incident Response Services has observed this month so far. First, taking a look at the most active ransomware, the top 3 are Akira, Qlin, and Kawa, and then some of the other notable ones are Babook, Chaos, and Lynx. Both Chaos and Lynx are tied to existing groups that have recently rebranded. Kawa Locker is a new one that we'll talk more about here shortly, and Akira and Qlin are both very active and notorious ransomware groups that have been around for several years. Now, in terms of what are the actual initial access vectors or access avenues that are leading to these intrusions or incidents? Over this month so far, the number 1 by far is SonicWall VPN, followed by Fortinet, Microsoft RD Web, Cisco VPN, and Microsoft SQL servers. And in terms of what are some of the reasons why those platforms have been compromised, the main reason is a lack of multi-factor authentication, but there's also certainly been a lot of cases with unpatched systems, unprotected assets, as well as compromised credentials, and in some cases, malicious downloads. So these are just some of the trends from this month so far in terms of what we're seeing leading to incidents. But let's dive a little bit more into that number one initial access vector being SonicWall VPN. You heard from my colleague Dan earlier about some of the recent news from SonicWall where other security vendors put out publications saying that they think there might be a zero-day vulnerability within SonicWall. We certainly within MDR were investigating an increase of cases towards the later half of this summer, but what we observed varied slightly from what other vendors observed and shared publicly. Specifically, other vendors discussed seeing intrusions where victims had multi-factor enabled and their systems were up to date. Whereas with our observations, all of our SonicWall victims that were leading to Akira ransomware either did not have multi-factor authentication or out-of-date systems. So from our perspective, we did not believe that this was related to a zero-day, and after some investigation, SonicWall came to the same conclusion. Now, in terms of some of the trends that we've seen across cases, one interesting thing that we've noticed is the compromise of the LDAP integration account used by the SonicWall appliance. And if you are using SonicWall appliances or just in general, it's really important to limit the privileges of these integration accounts. There are some cases where threat actors have had success due to configurations that ultimately had more privilege than needed for these integration on the firewall accounts. In general, when threat actors perform global brute forcing campaigns, we've noticed a trend where they tend to target countries that they believe they can get a higher payout from. Typically, these are Western and European-based countries, but we've certainly seen cases in Asia as well as other regions. And in general, Akira is the most successful ransomware group that we've seen targeting SonicWall this past quarter, but we've also seen a few other situations where different ransomware is deployed. Within our subset of cases, or within the SonicWall compromises, we identified a unique subset of cases, which is a campaign that we track as Stack 4642. This is a financially motivated threat actor that's directly associated with Akira ransomware. And we noticed that across multiple intrusions, they were leveraging the exact same EDR killer that our endpoint was detecting at the time of it being written to disk. We also observed them trying to perform DLL sideloading into a legitimate Windows binary that's built into the operating system. This was detected by one of our ATK or attack framework based detections, as this tool was the DLL they were trying to sideload was designed to facilitate command and control. Ultimately, these threat actors are very efficient at performing network discovery. They use tools like Advanced IP Scanner and other tools like TeamViewer to try to blend into some of the normal activity within a corporate network. Ultimately, their end objective is to collect data with WinSCP or other data collection tools, and they are particularly known for targeting virtualization infrastructure. So there are situations where our product is detecting their ransomware, but due to misconfigurations or successfully compromised admin credentials, they might be able to impact the target network by encrypting their virtualization infrastructure. And lastly, in terms of their general sectors that we've seen them targeting, this particular threat actor is very opportunistic, but they seem to have a preference towards manufacturing and telecommunications, which those particular sectors are likely going to pay the ransom due to some of the sensitivity with wanting to be online and available, as well as customer data in the telco sector. And so that's just one particular threat actor or threat campaign that we've seen within the SonicWall subset of cases. But another interesting threat that we've seen related to VPN compromises is Kawa Locker. Kawa Locker is a new ransomware that first emerged in June of this year. Interestingly enough, it has the exact same data leak site theme as Akira ransomware, which is this black and green, very hacker text website. And we observe them in SonicWall compromises as well, which is primarily tied to Akira. So our current belief is that maybe this is a ransomware brand or identity that's associated or maintained by some of these same threat actors. However, there are some contradicting points, like for an example, some of the ransomware extortion note, which is on the screen here, matches the same verbiage of QLin ransomware, which is a very popular ransomware as a service. The threat actors in this case made attempts to remove Sophos through EDR killers that were detected, but they also used common remote or dual use tools like advanced port scanner for discovery. And one of the things that separates them from both Akira is QLin is the way that they go about performing extortion negotiations. Most of these big ransomware programs operate Tor websites where they host these name and shame data leak sites, but they also often operate Tor websites to extort and have victim negotiations where they try to get paid. Recently, Lockbit had a infiltration where their Tor-based negotiation website was compromised and their chats were published. And what we've seen is a minor shift in the criminal ecosystem where some threat actors are preferring to have these extortion conversations on privacy-oriented third-party platforms like Session, Onion Mail, and QTalks. And this is likely as a way to avoid law enforcement attention onto their infrastructure by leveraging third-party tools. And so that's it for this month's Observed Threat Activity section. Now I'll be passing the mic on to Pavle to take us through the threat hunting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. Hello, everyone. For this month, we have a set of hunts that we would like to highlight. So let's jump right into it. The first one that we'd like to talk about is one that's been kind of making waves in the news for the last month, the SharePoint remote code execution exploit. It's actually really a set of exploits that kind of flow from phase to phase in order to allow the attackers to achieve what they're trying to achieve. So I wanted to kind of highlight a little bit of the technical details about how the specific phase attack works and why it works as well. So first off, this entire exploit, it really is rooted in two fundamental vulnerabilities that are associated with SharePoint, and they're highlighted here on the screen. However, those two are really just a modern way to streamline what really was a core vulnerability back in 2021. There was a CV published 28474 back in 21 that talked about how arbitrary code, a specific way that SharePoint manages and interprets specific strings would exploit a function called viewState. ViewState is a function in SharePoint that allows for the state of the user interface to remain constant to the user as they navigate in and out of the browser or the session itself. So when you log out, log back in, if you navigate from one page to another, the way that everything is arranged on the screen is handled by the specific viewState function. And there was a vulnerability in the software itself that allowed for this viewState to be abused through these injected strings. However, what it required was a specifically signed code. It's called the machine code or the validation key. And that validation key had to be valid, current, and legitimate in order to inject it into the stream itself and to abuse the actual viewState. Now, this vulnerability was supposedly patched, but not to the degree to where it couldn't be abused again. So these two new sets of vulnerabilities are what are actually re-abusing, if that's a word, this specific flaw in the software itself. So the way that it really works is a two-phase approach. The first one is to bypass the need to have a secure, trusted relationship with the specific instance of SharePoint. And that's done by abusing and passing a specific string through the actual packet itself as you're interacting with the page. And this packet here, it contains the signout.aspx string, which basically tells the page that this is now a trusted relationship. This is a trusted interaction with the specific instance. So the SharePoint is actually going to trust the next set of code that comes in because it's following the same kind of stream of code that is feeding into the actual engine itself. So once the authentication bypass is achieved by passing a specific instruction through the packet capture or the packets itself, the network packet, then you can get into the second phase or the next step of the actual attack, which is the deserialization, remote code execution. Serialization is just a way to kind of invoke the stream of data that is flowing from one network node to another. So a specific object within the software itself is serialized, it's turned into a stream. That stream then flows and is fed through the network until the client machine receives the stream, and then it's deserialized or it's reassembled into another object that is then loaded into the browser itself. In this case, the specific stream that comes through is deserialized by injecting the code into the actual stream itself. So once it becomes deserialized on the server itself, the one that is actually hosting the SharePoint, then it's actually going to execute the code that was part of that stream that was injected as part of the exploit itself. And you can see in the red bracket the actual part where it's actually flowing and injecting the machine key or that validation key that I talked about. So in this case, you don't have to know the key ahead of time. The actual deserialization attack will extract the code from the SharePoint instance and feed it back into it to allow for further remote code execution. Once you achieve these two steps, the actual authentication bypass or the authorization bypass and the deserialization, after that, the attackers basically have full control over their instance itself. All of the other commands and controls that are issued to the server itself are done through the parent process of SharePoint, which is the w3wp.exe. So that is usually not monitored, and it very often will match what is normally done to kind of administer the actual instance itself. So it's very hard once the two phases are done to actually detect and monitor this type of behavior, because it's going to more or less look like it's normal operation using that process as a parent process. So this is why this attack was so important to patch quickly and to monitor it ahead of time while those two phases are still occurring, because upon the fact that you actually have the serial key put into the instance itself in the stream, then it's more or less game over for the attackers. They can kind of do whatever they want on that specific node. So it's a really interesting attack, and one that hopefully cannot be repeated again post-patch, but we'll continue monitoring this specific vector because there appears to be some embedded flaws in the way that SharePoint is actually interpreting the specific code. And this is one of the examples of the hunts that we've performed around this. So we were basically mainly monitoring specific types of child processes that are spawned by this parent process of SharePoint that are invoking some sort of command line, command prompt codes, especially if they are encoded prompts, and especially the ones that have the layout keyword in it. Because if you recall from the previous slide, the layout piece is the one that kind of authenticates or allows for the subsequent set of code to be trusted code. So we want to ensure that we're not seeing anything that is done on the server side that is injecting that specific command and instruction to the actual server itself. So that was the first one. The second one that I wanted to highlight, it kind of pivots off of what Dan was talking about, the WinRAR abuse. I wanted to give a little bit of a detail on how this specific exploit occurred and what is the technical aspect to it that makes it so interesting and why it was important to patch it as well. So in this case, we're going to be focusing on RomCom as the group. However, there are other groups in the wild that have been using and abusing the specific exploit. However, the RomCom is the one that was most commonly published around. So in this case, we're going to talk a little bit about what is this path traversal vulnerability and why that worked within the WinRAR. So in order to understand this, we first have to understand what are alternate data streams, or ADS. With NTFS file system, what has been introduced and is now widespread across other operating systems as well is the idea that the file itself doesn't have to necessarily contain all of the information that it needs in order to function, that there are certain things that there is going to stream from other locations as well. And those things are usually just enrichment data, metadata, things that describe the file or the operation of the file. And these streams can be then used by other files as well. So it's kind of like a shared resource that these files can use. This was used to kind of streamline how things interact and how files and applications interact with one another, and to also make it more efficient. However, these ADS streams are much harder to detect, especially because they do not appear as files on the file system. You have to have specific views and permissions in order to see which data streams a file will actually feed off of. Of course, one of the applications where this is also evident and does not appear is WinRAR. If a specific file has alternate data streams, and these streams are part of its operation, if they are packaged together with within a specific WinRAR archive, they will not appear once you're actually exploring and browsing the files that are in that archive. So what ends up happening is that once you start extracting it, the ADS will have, in this case, specific instructions to extract and build a malicious library or a file in a completely different location than the one where the core file is going to end up with. So if the file is called temp.txt, for example, and you want to extract it into your desktop, if it has any ADS links, those links, if they have their own separate set of instructions, they will extract wherever those set of instructions are telling them to extract. In this case, in this specific attack, they're extracting into a auto start or startup folder or any other folder that is going to be used and invoked once a user logs in, or if they restart their computer. So in this case, what they're doing is first they're using, if you can see in the purple box, .. This is a common way to kind of traverse back from whatever your current folder is, your current directory, way back to your root directory. And then once you have that set of instructions, once you have enough dots and backslashes, you will get to the root drive. And then from there on, you could just specify that you want to go into users, app data, wherever you want to place your specific file or library that you're loading through the ADS. So in this case, this would not be visible to the user at all, unless they're specifically looking at the errors that are showing up in the extraction window. Dan was showing a screenshot of that, but I'm going to just kind of zoom in on it just so you can see the elements that are clearly pointing that the specific file has ADS links to them. If you can see the purple arrows, they're a little bit hard to see, but they're pointing at the colon sign. The colon itself is indicating that this is part of an ADS, and it's going to now specify where within the drive system is going to extract a specific file. So in this case, in the first screenshot on the top, you can see that it's pointing towards WinRAR temp, and it's a RAR partial file, and there's a stream value indicated by the actual $sign. And in the bottom, you will actually see the file name that is supposed to be rebuilt by this ADS. In this case, it highlighted in yellow. It's showing msedge.dll. Remember that specific file. It's going to come. It's going to be useful in the next slide, but that is specifically what is pointing in the error message. So not like your success message, everything went well. This is the error message of WinRAR that is actually showing this. So unless you're paying attention, you will miss it, and the extraction operation will complete as intended. So I mentioned that msedge.dll. In this case, there are two specific post-exploitation activities that occurred once the actual exploit was successful. One was around deploying Mythic C2 agent. This was a custom agent like Dan was showing, and in this case, it was abusing msedge and how it's loading specific COM objects that are pointed through the registry. msedge.dll is used by Microsoft Edge, and it's a COM object. There is a COM object that is specifically invoking this library, and it's doing that through the registry key. If a specific ADS will point and change the key, the registry key of that specific DLL library to a wrong directory or a wrong file, a malicious file, msedge will load that file every time that is opened. And in this case, it's actually providing persistence mechanism so that the victim machine can communicate with the C2 infrastructure. So that was the first variant of the post-exploitation that occurred directly associated with this RomCom attack. The second one was around SnipBot. Again, Dan mentioned this. SnipBot is actually a fork of a fork. So it's a PuTTY fork, PuTTY used to interact remotely with machines. In this specific case, it was a fork of a PuTTY fork, PuTTY CAC, which allows some additional cryptography features. And why that was important? Because they were encoding and encrypting a lot of their actual streams from the C2 infrastructure into the actual victim machine. So that's why they use a specific one, especially because this one has been signed, although the signature itself has been revoked, but it has been signed originally to appear and look as a legitimate PuTTY application. All in all, a really interesting attack. One, again, that allows for multiple different post-exploitation activities to occur. However, the core functionality is around the actual path traversal and those alternate data streams that I discussed earlier. And in this case, we were looking for specific things where the changes to the registry occurred. So this is a post-exploitation hunt that occurred. There were several other ones. We just wanted to highlight one version of it, where we're looking to see whether there are any changes to that registry key that points to the msedge.dll being changed to a specific directory that is not, or an non-standard directory in this case, so that we can be abused to set up persistent mechanism. That is all from me. I'm going to pass it on now to Greg, I believe.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pavlo. Right. Let's see if. Oh, yes. Sorry. Before I get started. Actually, Pavlo's just left stage, but the ADS is fascinating to see that rear its head. It was like remember it was like BitPaymer, maybe 2017. It's a while ago now, but I think they were like using ADS to write their entire malicious payload. It's just interesting that these like old Windows features seem to rear their heads again every X number of years, where they start becoming effective again. I guess it's because some security vendors are not paying so much close attention to them. I don't know, but it's interesting to see it pop up yet again, and another weird feature of Windows that you wouldn't expect, especially if you're kind of used to a lot of different file systems where you don't know the specifics, say, of like ADS and NTFS. But yeah, so just before we get into the X-Ops review, just to point out, Pavlo's only been able to cover a couple of interesting hunts this month, but there's a whole number of hunts that they conduct every single month, and these are kind of like mini projects, so don't see it as writing one query. As you can tell from the way Pavlo's explaining it, it's really a case of iterating, exploring, using statistical analysis, clustering mechanisms or methods, all sorts of weird and wonderful techniques to try and identify the malicious from the benign. And so if you want to get an insight into those wide number of actual hunts that have been completed each month, check out this report. So you'll see it comes into your inbox. So go out to all the MDR contacts. They'll go into your inbox. There'll be a link to click into it, and it'll give you a much deeper insight every month as to what's been going on just beyond the couple that we can pluck out for the ThreatCast. Just thought I'd bring that to your attention. All right, so let's now cover off the X-Ops review, looking at the kind of threat research that the X-Ops team has been putting out over the last month. So since the last ThreatCast, because I think we went out on the 28th, so something else popped up, which is on the 29th. That was Goldblade, a kind of novel technique that uses kind of LNK files with WebDAV to go and call a remote DLL and then load that. Really interesting kind of attack chain. Again, there's these kind of minor tweaks and permutations are always interesting to see how actors are trying to find ways to keep using the same techniques, but to then just modify them a little bit to see how they can actually get that to be successful. Really interesting piece written by Mark Parsons as well. Kudos to Mark. Hopefully you're watching this. Well done, mate. The next piece is a really interesting piece that goes a real kind of deep dive into an EDR killer. So a tool or a bit of software that's designed to disable EDR agents on target hosts to effectively then use that to hide what they're doing and then conduct the rest of their malicious kind of activity. Really interesting deep dive into these tools. That the X-Ops team has put out multiple pieces over the years around all the various different variants of EDR killers. Just really interesting to see the kind of the way it's been developing. Next piece we got here is kind of a follow-on. So we talked about this last month, I think, is more of a teaser about the Black Hat talk that'll be coming up. But just this is now kind of the detail, the meat on the bones of that talk. But effectively, our AI team had come up with a really interesting way to use anomaly detection to, instead of using it to try and actually find malicious behaviors, which with anomaly detection, you have a really high false positive rate. It's just kind of part and parcel of the technology. It's very hard to discern the difference between benign and malicious with the kind of traditional anomaly detection approach, and so you have quite high false positive rates. So what they came up with is a really interesting strategy to use anomaly detection, but instead then with anomaly detection and a large language model to then label its output, use it not to try and find the malicious, but instead to find the benign that it's actually really good at finding. And so by building this kind of new method, instead of using an unsupervised sort of machine learning technique like anomaly detection to try and find maliciousness, they instead use this unsupervised technique with a large language model to create a much more diverse and interesting data set of the benign activities that take place in environments. And that benign data set that's now incredibly rich thanks to this new technique, they can then pass that on to supervised methods such as neural networks and the things that you find in our kind of the neural network part of our agents that looks for sort of maliciousness and significantly improve its efficacy. Really cool piece. I'm gutted I wasn't sorry, that's an English phrase. I'm crestfallen. I'm sad. I'm sad I wasn't a Black Hat to see that talk live. It's really interesting to see, existing technologies, but turned on their heads to build incredible new solutions without needing to sort of go miles away from what we've already got, so we can go straight into production. And again, sharing that information so other people can sort of go straight into start building it into their products. Really cool stuff. The next piece then is Patch Tuesday. They're fantastic pieces by Angela as usual, but as always, we all know the fun of Patch Tuesday. Go check it. Make sure you've patched. No surprises there. The next set of articles we've got here, there's a just a threat intelligence report. I won't give any spoilers. It's from the CTU, so the counter threat unit in Sophos. The great little intelligence report. They put these out in a regular cadence. This is just the latest one. Go check it out. Really well written and really it comes out on a bi-monthly basis and digs into kind of what's going on in the wider threat landscape. And then finally, another piece from the CTU is it's looking at Velociraptor, which is, I believe it's a digital forensics and incident response tool, so DFIR tool, used during incident responses by anyone who's purchased or acquired the software to go and collect artifacts and conduct activity and so on that you would expect in response to a threat. But here they saw a threat actor actually abusing it and to use it for remote access so that they can actually take part, to go and launch attacks with it. So fascinating, spinning a defense tool effectively against its head and using it for the bad. We see this all the time. We call these kind of dual use agents. And it's just interesting to see something that's very specifically used by defenders or at least incident responders and then being flipped on its head and then now used in this kind of context as a new dual use agent. Great piece. All right, we're at that point where we're in Q&A. And before I dive into the questions, just want to highlight that we have the threat brief. So on a weekly basis, we go and post to the MDR community channel a summary of what's been going on in the wider threat landscape. And we put this out on a weekly basis because we're doing this once a month. We can't cover absolutely everything in the ThreatCast live. So go check the threat brief out. It'll give you real interesting insights to what's going on from a week-to-week basis. And you can click the subscribe button or the blog notifications button inside there to get those sent straight into your inbox. All right, let's go and dive into some of those questions. I'm probably going to be calling members of my team on the stage, so it will be prepped to come jump in because I think some of these actually might catch me off. Let's start this first one. So this was about WinRAR, so either Dan or Colin or Pavla, anyone really, come jump on for this one. So does the threat actor bring WinRAR along with them, or are they abusing already installed copies of WinRAR? And then I guess there's a supplementary question here. So I guess, are threat actors using WinRAR? Like, is it bring your own vulnerable software, or is it, the victim's already got WinRAR installed? And then the other thing is, should they block WinRAR with application control? I assume because whether they aren't using it or so. But yeah, I can see Colin's got his camera on. There he comes. Hey, Colin.
That's a good question about the particularly this WinRAR campaign that was exploited by Russian state-sponsored threat actors. In their threat campaign, they were distributing a malicious resume that was compressed in a RAR archive and leveraging the pre-existing WinRAR installation on the victim's device. So in this situation, they were relying on the target to actually have WinRAR and a vulnerable version installed. That being said, if you don't use WinRAR, you could certainly add it to your application control, but I would also suggest making sure that you have other additional data collection tools like 7-zip in there as well if you are going to block data collection and archiving tools.
Fantastic. All right, actually stick around, Colin, because this next question is also for you, I think. So how effective are these takedowns? Oh, this actually is also Dan. But how effective are these takedowns of ransomware infrastructure? So I think it's talking about BlackSuit. How long does it take for the actors to spin up again and return to previous levels of attacks?
Yeah, so in regards to ransomware rebranding and groups like BlackSuit changing to Chaos, what we've seen in the past, particularly with some of these Russian cybercrime community groups or criminal groups, is that they'll often set up a separate brand before they even finish operating their main brand. So they hedge their bets with a secondary ransomware variant and will often operate both of them simultaneously in preparation for a need to shut down the first brand. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But I guess, from your kind of experience, I guess, in threat intelligence, when there is this kind of gap, is there like a period where there's no activity, or we see like dwindled numbers? What's the kind of velocity at which it kind of returns back to previous levels of attacks? Or does it stay the same all throughout? Is it quite a kind of consistent level of attacks in terms of ransomware, I guess?
It certainly varies by threat actor and motivation, particularly for a lot of the ransomware threat actors that are operating out of Eastern Europe. We see them take certain time periods of the year, like a summer holiday and a Russian Orthodox Christmas. So there are certainly times that we see threat actors spending more time developed towards resource and R&D, whereas other times they're focused more on actually performing the intrusions.
Nice. Okay. Alrighty. Let's see. got a couple more questions that come in around EDR killers, so I'm going to jump onto that one. So this one is, what is Sophos doing in response to EDR killers? Does tamper protection defeat them, or is it more than, sorry, is there more that we should do? So I guess the first part is an EDR killer is, by its very nature, listen to the title, right? EDR killer. It is always going, whoever's building a tool like that is always going to be looking for whatever is the next vector or method they can use to try and evade and then sort of unpick EDR agents. So the nature of the name, and the nature of the tool means, will just one layer of protection actually defend against all EDR killers, say like tamper protection? Of course, for some, yes, there'll be some that it doesn't, but it's all about the kind of multi-layered approach. Our researchers are, of course, paying a lot of attention to this, and there's a whole number of different techniques that we have in place. But yeah, they're always going to be a pain. That said, there's quite a few vendors that threat actors who I've seen quite disgruntled, annoyed, Sophos when trying to use some of these tools because we've been pretty decent. But I'm not going to say we're perfect. The whole nature of these kind of tools is to try and find ways to unpick and disable EDR products. So it's kind of an important part of us. We have to stay on top of it. Always building additional to sort of capabilities and so on. But yes, absolutely have things like tamper protection turned on. It's certainly a great first step. And of course, make sure go and check best practices, best practice sort of configurations. Check your policies that you've got set up. Make sure you don't have lots of exclusions. Make sure you're keeping Windows up to date, right? I mean, a common thing is like where, stolen code signing certificates are used to sign other binaries, or old signed binaries are now being used by threat actors because of the vulnerability in it. And so certificate revocation lists are a big important part of that. So again, making sure that your hosts can communicate, or if they're like don't have access to the internet but access to the LAN, still make sure you're getting patches to them so that CRLs and so on are getting deployed to them. But yeah, it requires kind of a concerted effort across the board with all security controls because of the nature of the beast. But yeah, do go read that article. It gives you some insight, and I think it'll give you some confidence, at least, that our threat researchers really understand what's going on here and the concerns around it. And it's a game of staying on top of it, like malware in general. Alrighty, and there's another question, which is there a good list of software from Sophos that attackers use, such as WinSCP, TeamViewer, etc., that admins can monitor on our environment through EDR, Intune, RMM to alert block if detected? Colin, I see your cameras come on, so here's Colin. Nice one.
Yeah, in terms of recent observations, in April, we published our Sophos Active Adversary report. In that report, we shared both the top 10 tools from the Rapid Response or Incident Response Service, as well as the MDR service. I'll go ahead and link that publication in our chat, but as just a quick recap, some of the tools that we shared as our top 10 from 2024 include Soft Perfect Network Scanner, AnyDesk, rclone, Advanced IP Scanner, WinSCP, Advanced Port Scanner, PuTTY, 7-Zip, and others. So definitely be sure to check out the recent publication from April.
Nice. And stick around because I think I've missed a report. So another really good question. I mean, it sounds fascinating. I just wish I could talk to it. With the very recent discovery from ESET of a local LLM-based ransomware, prompt lock, they're calling it, is there anything we'll need to start watching for, or will the current protections against encryption and behavior-based work? So do you know about this prompt lock variance that's been going around?
Yeah, so prompt lock is making some headlines for integrating AI into their extortion negotiation process. And as far as I can understand, prompt lock is an evolution in the way that ransomware crafts their extortion notes, but the underlying mechanism of encrypting files is still ransomware, which is something that CryptoGuard is designed to protect against. And there are certainly new ransomware variants that show up every day pretty much. And so while I haven't explicitly looked at this particular ransomware in more depth, I would assume that CryptoGuard would do a good job of protecting against the underlying data encryption.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the benefit of CryptoGuard. So that was Mark Lohman's team when they sort of joined Sophos many years ago, and sort of they've been working on this thing as part of Hitman, a product they've been building for many years. They took a very kind of different approach to trying to detect against ransomware. So they're actually looking at that kind of fundamental way in which files are encrypted, the speed, what's being encrypted, and so on, and sort of convicting based on behavior in that instance. So that's always, I mean, it's been incredibly effective. Of course, it's incredibly false positive prone because like any kind of of unsupervised kind of approach to things where it's looking at kind of behaviors, there are going to be false positives, but it's incredibly good signals to go looking for. It's an incredibly potent signal for us in MDR to pay attention to. Any triggering of CryptoGuard, we're going to dig into and try and figure out what's going on. So yeah, I as long as that's not changing, but I'm sure we're going to see permutations of things crop up. I know the other thing is, as browsers are becoming very sort of AI centric and having kind of AI agents built into the browser, I've seen some sort of proof of concepts where they're looking at effectively, as you go onto a web page, you could actually hide parts that the human can't see on the page, but that the AI agents will see, and will then start prompt injecting and getting it to do strange things, such as divulging secrets from the browser, passwords, cookies, session tokens, things like that. So I think there is going to be a new caliber of kind of threat that we all need to pay attention to. It's probably going to start, I'd say, first in the browser before I'd say LLMs. An actor deploying some kind of quantized model to every endpoint as part of their payload is going to be pretty interesting and probably easy to detect, looking just at the payload itself. But in terms of these new threats, I think that's going to emerge, especially in the browser. That's something, I think we're all going to be paying attention to. So watch this space. I mean, it's one of the nice things about having an AI team internally, as we talked about that black hat piece a few minutes ago. Our team are looking at both the positive uses of AI, but also the negative uses of AI. So previously they looked at things like how to effectively create a targeted page for a person, so that when an individual clicks on it, just based on profiling them, if you can find out like just anything about the user, their location, maybe like if it's an email address or any other data point you'd correlate it to, like social media and so on, you can then spin up an entire page that's designed to profile them and convince them to take action. So that also when security researchers try and analyze the page, we're never going to see what a victim saw, and that's what the AI team was looking at. So yeah, always check out the threat research. Go and check out Sophos News. There's some really interesting kind of non-product pieces where our researchers are looking at it. So for my own ability to sleep at night, it's very nice reading, knowing that there's people paying attention to that. But yeah, we're going to see some strange and interesting emergent behaviors. Right, there's another question. I think we've got time to take a couple more. So as a recent recipient to the Putty Oyster backdoor exploit, are there signatures IPs that we should load in Sophos Central as an MDR client? So I've not seen this one. If we have IOCs, this might be one we take offline, but if someone wants to grab that, maybe we can get something shared into the news article if we've got anything notable that could be shared. I'll leave that for the team behind the scenes to take. All right, let's go on to some other questions. Oh, Colin, come for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is about Oyster Loader, or another term for it is Cleanup Loader. It's a malware as a service that's associated with ransomware. We've seen cases both within MDR and rapid response where threat actors have employed this malware family alongside malicious advertisements to ultimately gain network access and attempt to deploy ransomware. We've certainly seen various different layers of Sophos controls detecting at some of the post-exploitation or post-compromise threat actor behavior, like attempting to dump credentials from Veeam, or for one of our rapid response customers, the ransomware that the threat actors deployed did trigger CryptoGuard detections. But in regards to the underlying question about are there specific IPs or signatures that you think you should be loading into Sophos Central? At this point in time, we don't have anything that we would suggest loading in there, but if there is a threat report that you're reading on this malware family and you're concerned that maybe Sophos isn't covering all of it, please do reach out and we can ensure that Sophos Labs takes a look and that we have full coverage of those underlying malware samples. But it is something that we do make efforts to proactively track these malware families and coordinate with Sophos Labs to prioritize threats according to impact that we see within MDR.
Thanks, Colin. Alrighty. There's two more sat in here, so I think we'll have time the next 10 minutes. So would you recommend migrating off of SharePoint on-prem to cloud? I'm trying to find maybe a nicer way. I want to phrase this the clean way. Okay, so on-prem to SharePoint, I mean, firstly, it's effectively a web server. If you've got it facing the internet and you've got it exposed to the internet, right, that's something you probably just don't want to be doing. In general, I mean, this is my own personal opinion, but I've always felt that I think organizations really should minimize absolutely everything that they expose to the internet and tunnel it all over VPN if possible. If there's things that you need to only have available to your employees, but the wider world doesn't need to have access to, then by all means go, VLAN that off or route it so that it's only accessible, through a VPN. And that way your users just connect to the VPN and then they can access those resources if you want to stay on-prem. And that's a much better architecture than exposing it carte blanche to the internet. And thus, if there's a vulnerability, then that kind of the high velocity we're seeing actors take advantage of those vulnerabilities faster than some people are able to patch. In terms of moving to cloud, of course, I think in this instance of this SharePoint vuln, and I think the last few, Microsoft's been very quick to patch. And of course, the patching's done for you. So in general, this is kind of that same comment of a lot of sort of cloud services. That's kind of one of the benefits that you get. Let's at least sort of minimize your requirement to go and pay attention. Let's say the vuln pops up at 9 p.m. on a Friday, and you don't have a 24/7 operation, so there isn't someone that's going to do that patch on the weekend or in those few hours from Friday until, let's say, Saturday morning. Then being on cloud, at least that's in someone else's sort of responsibility list. That's not in yours. But yeah, I think that, going back to my original advice, if there's certain purposes that you've got for SharePoint where you do need to have it facing the internet, then you might want to be migrating that out of your infrastructure, or at least how it's connected to your infrastructure, and put it into something separate so that at least if that is compromised, it's not going to then have some way of then going, spreading from that to other parts of your kind of environment. But of course, I'm sure there's some integrations in SharePoint I'm unaware of that would still cause risk. So I revert back to my first one. I put it over VPN. All right, last one. I think this is one for Pavla if you want to pop on stage. So it is, I've been getting stuck into writing my own. I'll wait for you to come on stage because I think your audio drops as you come on stage, isn't it? There we go. I've been getting stuck into writing my own queries. Do you have any advice around how to look for suspicious w3wp.exe? So I think it's IIS web server. So w3wp.exe activity that might be from other threats than, say, the SharePoint threat you just discussed. So I guess some generic approaches. One might threat hunt over a web server. Let's generalize it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did mention during my presentation that once the attack kind of gets to that stage, you have to be mindful of the fact that this specific process is being used by admins, by the actual application itself. So you kind of have to sift through the noise to really identify what is being done with hands-on keyboard type perspective. So in this case, what we would look for, specifically when we're doing hunting, is any child processes that are using W3WP as a parent process that are doing things that are either obviously hands-on keyboard type activities, making spelling mistakes, rerunning commands with different arguments or variables that are similar or the same, doing discovery things like who am I, dir, trying to kind of, if an attacker goes into an environment, they will try to look for where am I, where can I go from here? If you're seeing these types of commands, this is not a normal SharePoint application or admin type of command. So any sort of discovery commands, any sort of spelling mistakes, things that look like they're being repeated by a person behind the keyboard, as well as any other scripted type processes that may indicate that somebody's using a preset canned types of scripts, things that are encoded, PowerShell being used as the interpreter for specific encoded scripts, things like reaching out to the internet for secondary stage payloads, any sort of command line or PowerShell commands or strings that are using curl or wget, reaching out to IP-based networking. These are all generally things that everybody should really be mindful of when they're looking through their environment. But in this case, specifically in the context of using that as a parent process, this could be a good indicator of a potentially malicious or at least anomalous type activity that should and we definitely recommend to be investigated further.
That sounds really fascinating. Your job sounds fun, Pavla. Right, I think we're kind of going to roll it there. I don't think there's any other questions outstanding. Nope, I don't see any notifications. Alrighty. Yeah, all right. All right, everyone, thanks so much for your time today. As always, we've got all the references available for all the things that we discussed today. Don't panic. You don't need to take a screenshot of this, although feel free while I say this for a few seconds. This will all be shared onto the community within the next 24 hours or so with the video link and with all the references and with the threat hunt queries. So check back in the next day or so. You should find it on the community. And if you've got blog notifications turned on, you'll get an email notification as soon as that's posted. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. As always, stay cautious, stay vigilant and suspicious. And if you have any concerns whatsoever about anything that you might be observing going on within your environment, do not hesitate to contact the Sophos MDR team at your earliest convenience. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you next time. Take care.